Taking in impressions. In a general sense, we cannot take in new impressions unless we have new impressions of ourselves to start from. Particularly, we cannot take in new impressions of other people unless we have begun to have new impressions of ourselves. To leave oneself out and begin with others is exactly what this work does not teach. We have to begin to change within ourselves before anything can possibly change for us in the outer world of things, people, and events. When one is satisfied with oneself, such as we are, then it is difficult to understand what self-change really means. Hence, it is difficult to gather new impressions. Then, since we remain this thing called me, myself, and I, we take in only the old stereotypical cycle of impressions of people and of our world. Why is this so? Because our level of being is the receptive sense upon which impressions fall. It is our instrument of perception, and can only receive what it does and is, so can receive nothing new. For example, we could talk with someone and note that if they could but see, say, Mr. Augustus Smith, and not identify so much with him, then they would probably get better in health and live longer. However, this is difficult, and it always sounds strange that one should go and see Mr. Smith or Mrs. Smith. And so, with the absence of this interaction, the individual with affliction succumbs to their ailments and passes on. The most important thing in this system of teaching inner change is precisely these new impressions. P.D. Ouspensky would return to the theme often and emphasize the point. We have to do the same for ourselves, for although we might have heard it many times, we keep forgetting and so continue to fail to understand, not quite getting what is implied. We fail to grasp that we live with some person that we call ourselves. We take this thing as ourselves, never drawing a distinction between the person and ourself. However, it is upon drawing precisely that distinction that work lays emphasis. For unless a separation has begun, the inner action of work on self cannot commence operations. Here are two sheets, one of cartridge paper and the other a covering stuck to it. Before the work can inscribe its meaning upon the paper beneath, the covering must be separated from its underlying surface. And so, personality must be separated from essence. To use a different illustration, in our case, we must separate from ourselves. Notice, however, that a quite new impression of oneself is necessary for anything of this kind even to begin to happen. A complacent individual is not likely to be able to shift one iota from their inner situation because they are quite satisfied with themselves and convinced that they are simply marvelous and a 10. So we will not be able to get new impressions of ourselves or of anything else because we are fastened down inside. All of us are secured or stuck to something that we have to disentangle from. In Buddhism, it is referred to as samsara, inner suffering, or if you prefer, in the weeds. It's like those two sheets of paper where one is real and the other not. However, they seem to be one because they are stuck together, yet they can actually be separated. All this can take place only psychologically, for it is one psychology stuck to another, which has nothing to do with subjective things that we can see or handle and touch, which is why it is so difficult. The complexity arises from the fact that it lies in an invisible world in which we actually live, and so it is significant where we go and what we do in our invisible world, accessible only to our self-consciousness. This work is about that invisible world and what separations are necessary within it, what directions must be taken in order to reach our destination. Naturally enough, we find it very difficult to understand that it does matter, not so much what we think or feel, but what thoughts and feelings we identify with and say I to. No one can practice this without making a certain kind of effort called work effort. What is this kind of effort? It starts with becoming conscious of that invisible world in which each of us lives, which requires a definite kind of effort of attention, the application of a distinct kind of knowledge. So we have to observe ourselves from the standpoint of whatever knowledge this work imparts upon us, just as we'd follow the map's application on our mobile device. If you lack that knowledge, then you cannot observe yourself rightly, and we cannot work unless we grasp what is meant here. To take yourself as yourself and merely add the work to that crude, undeveloped inner state is useless. You will get it all wrong. One must divide themselves into two before they can shift from where they are psychologically. We all must realize that people, including ourselves, are not merely somewhere in space and time, rich or poor, tall or short, old or young, and so on, but each of us is also somewhere at some level within our invisible psychological world. So then ask yourself, where am I? Ask yourself and notice, for we cannot begin to do this work unless we see something of what is meant here. The pendulum swings always between opposites, whether literally as in events of life such as war and peace, political and community events, summer and winter, or psychologically between love and hate and so on. George Gurdjieff taught that humanity lacked third force. In this is meant first of all that people, who are created to become conscious beings, swing between the opposites of themselves, and so are governed by the swing of opposing events in their lives. War starts, for example. The ruling party changes after an election, and we are governed by it. P.D. Ouspensky would say that people do not comprehend how they are governed by changing events, imagining that they are always free. They say, in times of peace, that they will never under any circumstances go to war again, and, he added, when a new war starts, they always justify themselves, explaining why they must do as they must do, because they cannot help doing. Gurdjieff, in teaching this work, always emphasized that we were not yet conscious, but could become so, and were thus made to be just like this. Sometimes he expanded by saying that people are not conscious in third force, and that everyone must bring third force into their life in order to develop. By work definition, all manifestations are due to the action of three forces, called active, passive, and neutralizing force. Active and passive forces are on the opposites, and therefore cancel one another out, as expressed scientifically in Newton's first law of motion. To every force there is an equal and opposite force. The law of dualities, however, is not entirely true as it stands, because if things were like that, then nothing could ever take place and nothing would move. If Newton had added that to every force there is eventually, in time, an equal and opposite force, it would probably not have been necessary for Einstein to bring the fourth dimension of time into the study of physics. Yet physics today, even introducing this new factor of time, has yet to reach, in any deep sense, the idea that there is actually a third force which acts between the pendulum opposites. The third or neutralizing force of this work is defined in many ways. One way is to say that it is the uniting force, that force which acts between yes or no, active or passive, and makes something new that is neither of them. In studying statistics, we encounter the laws of average. For example, so many percentile of people usually die at 60 or 65 years of age, and upon this statistical law, applying it to large numbers, all insurance is based. On average, you will have so many gas molecules going one way, so many in another way, out of millions, and as a result could make laws about the behavior of gases under pressure and temperature. Such laws, however, are based upon large numbers, and so are called statistical. If you cast a penny 1,000,000 times, you will get an average of heads and tails that more or less lies in equilibrium. The science of statistics is really derived from the idea that there is equilibrium in all things, which is based upon the law of the pendulum. There is, however, another force, apart from the opposites at work in life, in ourselves, and throughout the entire universe, which is the law of three. Average laws and statistical laws are based only upon the idea of there being a duality of two forces at work, the yin and yang of philosophy. This work states that one of the two ultimate laws, which cannot be reduced to any simpler terms, is the law of three forces. In everything, three forces are at work. In the minute structures of a microcosm, both active and passive forces are found, positive and negative charges, and so on. But from a work point of view, there is also a third force, an organizing force, the force that creates and organizes the two primitive, chaotic opposing forces that, in and of themselves, can create nothing, since they are antagonistic and always in opposition to one another. Third force may be difficult to grasp. The work itself is a third force to begin with, however, only when it is acknowledged and felt emotionally. Once we begin to actually feel, then its power lies in making active personality passive, and our passive, undeveloped essence within active, to change the sign of these two parts in our being. From this, we can see how third force could alter the relationship of fixed things, just as events do in life, such as war. Everything is turned upside down. Events in life are third force, but they keep personality active and essence passive. Work, as an internal series of events, changes this life-based relationship and alters us fundamentally through a new spirit and a new view, through being reborn. We cannot, of course, understand spiritual life in this sense from the facts of everyday life. From a work point of view, the individual whose mind and thought are wholly based upon the evidence of their senses has their brain wired incorrectly. The spirit of life, the third force of life, is different from the spirit of work on self. However, the spirit of life, the organizing principle that makes use of those irreconcilable dualistic forces, active and passive, positive and negative, constructs organized matter, whether atoms, molecules, or cells, and does so on a basis that cannot be taken in any statistical sense. A biological cell, particularly the germ cell, is an example of this, as the physicist Schrödinger points out in his book. Erwin Schrödinger was a Nobel Prize-winning Austrian physicist who developed a number of fundamental results in the field of quantum theory, which formed the basis of wave mechanics. He formulated the wave equation, stationary and time-dependent Schrödinger equation, and revealed the identity of his development of the formalism and matrix mechanics. Schrödinger proposed an original interpretation of the physical meaning of wave function. Schrödinger was willing to admit that there are other laws in life, other than those deduced from the average behavior of millions of particles, whether atoms or human beings. In most esoteric writings of the ancients, which all deal with organizing spirit and never with statistics, it is sometimes said that spirit, the organizing principle in us, psychologically speaking, is almost devoured by matter in its descent into gross materiality. The esoteric alchemists, not pseudo-gold seekers, called that imprisoned organizing force hidden within us Mercury, and noted that where it is found, lead can be transformed into gold. In work on self, this organizing principle is sometimes called buried conscience, or real conscience, as opposed to acquired conscience that we follow from what we have been told by others and learnt from the outside world. The organizing power of creation, whether bodily or psychological, exists throughout all living things. which is third force, and it seeks to build up, through successive stages of separation, something different from that in which it is lodged. So that in our case, the finer matters in us are gradually freed from any heavier, more chaotic, unorganized material. It is third force that seeks to bring about the evolution of all things, to find new and better combinations or relationships between active and passive forces which constitute gross materiality. The duality or opposites cannot create alone, and so are comparable to chaos magic or purgatory, where all the right materials exists but are assembled chaotically. Organizing spirit, organizing third force, which itself is buried in material chaos and works always to make something new out of it, in order to free and liberate itself ultimately, is what we see right before us and yet fail to comprehend. But an individual may be given new ideas, a new form of third force, as in the case of this work. Remember the man in Scriptures who buried his talent in the earth. The spirit of this work is not a thing you can touch or handle, nor indeed, of course, is any form of spirit. For example, is the esprit de corps of any regiment a thing you can see? Just as the team spirit of your favorite World Cup team. It is real, and yet it is also invisible and can only ever be felt. Recall how in the parable of the talents some made more of the spirit given them, but one did nothing except put the spirit given him into the earth. For it is as when a man, going into another country, called his own servants, and delivered unto them his goods. And unto one he gave 5 talents, unto another 2, to another 1, to each according to his several ability, and he went on his journey. Straightway he that received the 5 talents went and traded with them, and made other 5 talents. In like manner he also that received the 2 gained other 2. But he that received the 1 went away and dug in the earth, and hid his lord's money. Now after a long time the lord of those servants cometh, and maketh a reckoning with them. And he that received the 5 talents came and brought other 5 talents, saying, Lord, thou deliverest unto me 5 talents. Lo, I have gained other 5 talents. His Lord said unto him, Well done, good and faithful servant. Thou hast been faithful over a few things, I will set thee over many things. Enter thou into the joy of thy Lord. And he also that received the 2 talents came and said, Lord, thou deliverest unto me 2 talents. Lo, I have gained other 2 talents. His Lord said unto him, Well done, good and faithful servant. Thou hast been faithful over a few things. I will set thee over many things. Enter thou into the joy of thy Lord. And he also that had received the 1 talent came and said, Lord, I knew that thou art a hard man, reaping where thou didst not sow, and gathering where thou didst not scatter. And I was afraid, and went away and hid thy talent in the earth. Lo, thou hast thine own. But his Lord answered and said unto him, Thou wicked and slothful servant, thou knewest that I reap where I sowed not, and gather where I did not scatter. Thou oughtest therefore to have put my money to the bankers, and at my coming I should have received back mine own with interest. Take ye away therefore the talent from him, and give it unto him that hath the 10 talents. For unto every one that hath shall be given, but from him that hath not, even that which he hath shall be taken away. And cast ye out the unprofitable servant into the outer darkness. There shall be the weeping and the gnashing of teeth. See Matthew, chapter 25, verses 14 to 30.